Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mail Right podcast. Today is show number 286, and Jonathan and I are doing what we call an internal show, which means that it is just going to be the two of us. And today we're going to be talking about the concept of using storytelling to sell or get leads on various digital lead generating platforms. I have done a blog post recently that talks about using story inside of your actual bios. I think that we'll stick there because we'll start there and see where the conversation takes us. But before we go there, I'd like to take a moment and introduce all of you, especially the new listeners and viewers, to my amazing co-host, Jonathan, who is the founder of MailRight. He's the founder of this podcast. He has created not one, but two marketing companies. One is a learning management system company. The other is for real estate agents. He's done amazing things. He's a talented developer. He's a talented entrepreneur. Jonathan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
I don't know what to say after that intro. I'll just take you everywhere I go, Robert, and you can just introduce me. Like Robert said, I'm the founder of MailRight. And MailRight is a platform that uses the power of WordPress with a number of other technologies to get you quality leads. It's affordable. It's aimed at the solo, power couple, small team segment of the market. Go over to mailright.com, mail-right.com, and have a look at it and book a demo with me, and we can have a chat and we can see if we're a good partnership. Back over to you, Robert.
Wonderful. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my name is Robert Newman. I'm the founder of Inbound REM. We are an inbound marketing company, and that plays directly into what we're going to be talking about today, because this is a space that is not wildly served inside the real estate space. And basically, inbound marketing is selling through storytelling. It's answering questions that people have in such a thorough way that they're inspired to reach out to you. And there's marketing companies out there like Ylopo that use very, very small amounts of storytelling, like they do video in the form of advertising listings, but they really barely touch on it. And so today, the way I'd like to kick off a conversation about inbound marketing is a piece of inbound marketing that, John, that I know everybody uses. You use it. Every single person out there uses it. If you ever have a website online, you probably have written something called an about page or bio. Would you agree with that, John?
Yes, I do.
So what I've noticed is that people treat these about pages or bio pages as almost throwaway space on their website. Everybody is exhausted about talking about themselves, or they don't know how to talk about themselves. And so what they do is and see if this resonates with you, John. What they seem to do is, like, if I say about Jonathan, if I looked you up right now, I'll bet it'll say something like, I've been an entrepreneur for 15 years. I graduated from such and such a college. I live in Reno, Nevada, and I currently have two companies. Would I be correct if I made that guess?
Yeah, just about right, yeah.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. When you're communicating a message in the same way to everybody, all of us are communicating the message. The problem with communicating a message in a similar fashion is that very few people pay attention to the message that you're trying to communicate. If what you're doing with a bio page is literally saying, I went to school, I graduated in 1987, I have a high school diploma from such and such a school, I went to a trade school. Before, like, those of you who are listening to the show right now, I think you probably are already started to tune out in the 20 seconds I was describing a bio, let alone reading a bio. Okay. How many bios have you actually read that weren't prospects that were contacting you to do business with you, John?
Not that many.
Okay. So the reason that Jonathan and everybody else listening to the show has not read a lot of bios is because they are not sharing information in a compelling way. And here's the funny thing. in my own company, my own website, the number one way that I generate leads is actually through what is basically the longest bio that you've ever seen on on a marketing website. My bio on my website is 30 minutes long. And traditional knowledge says that you should actually be doing a 3-minute bio if you're going to be doing videos. So to say that you've done something that's 30 minutes long is extraordinarily unusual. And most of the time, every single marketing expert, myself included, would say, hey, that's a waste of time. Don't even do it. The way that I get away with it and the way that it generates me a massive amount of business is because I've decided to enclose what is basically my bio inside of a story. And that's what I want to talk to everybody, including you, John, about today. Because John is not a, like when you talk about you, John, and I'm just going to use you as an example, and you say you're a developer, you own a couple businesses, it's really, if you think about it, it's some of the least interesting things about your personal story. And what is your story? Like, if you were going to say from an outside view, like, what am I talking about when I talk about your story? Well, you're an import into the US and you had a reason for you leaving the UK. That is a really relevant part of your story. Now, maybe the story is I left the UK to come to the US to marry a woman. Okay. And that is part of your actual story about who you are as a human being. That one sentence communicates more about who you are than if I spent 10 minutes trying to list your achievements as an entrepreneur, because that doesn't say anything to anybody about who Jonathan Denwood is. What that says is that says what Jonathan Denwood has done. Am I tracking for you so far?
Yes, you are, Robert.
So today, in the world that we live in, the digital age that we live in, the power that digital holds for us is if we can communicate the story of who we are. Because if we can do that, we actually have a chance to make a connection to the other human. So to continue on, do you mind that I'm using you as an example?
No, not at all.
Okay. So if we continue on and we say, for instance, I'll give you another example, and this is slightly more personal, but we've talked about it on air before, so I'm going to assume you will not mind if I talk about it again. But another interesting thing about who John is as a person is he has dyslexia. And interestingly enough, part of his story about being an entrepreneur is the challenges and difficulties of having a disability-ish and working for other people. Would you say that that's correct? Because I think we talked about that one time.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're spot on.
Okay. So the story of John now becomes more like I've moved from Europe. I've come to the US because I had these personal challenges. I decided to open up my businesses. And the interesting thing about opening up a business with a disability is, of course, you have to work twice as hard for yourself as you do with anybody else. However, this challenge that I face slows me down or speeds me up as much as I personally prefer for it to do, because now I get to work around my own pace and my own style. And I'm kind of just winging this as we go along, but here's what I think for those of you that are listening, here's what the true story of John is. The true story of John is somebody that left a country out of love, moved to another country from love, worked very, very hard to overcome his personal challenges that he has. And we all have them. John just has his set. I have my stuff, which since I've so frequently put his stuff online, I'll put a little bit of mine online. I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict. So 14 years ago, I had lost everything. And so I've rebuilt up my business from the ground up. And here's what I'm sharing with all of you. This sounds personal. It sounds like stuff that in the business world we want to stay away from. I'm here to tell every single person that's listening to this show that if you think that, you're dead wrong. That the way to connect with people is to be honest, to share little glimpses of your life and interweave that with the stuff that you're doing in terms of your professional life. Like you interweave the facts. So now you know that John is probably very determined. because he's really burned all the bridges behind him. Same with me, by the way. I really don't want to work with anybody else. And while I could work with somebody else, there's a glass ceiling if anybody did a background check on me. Like there's literally a certain level that I could only like fly high up to. Maybe it's possible, but I don't want to deal with it. It's easier to work for myself for sure. And so that's something that you now know about John, which means that if you understand people, the chances of him being much more dedicated, much more determined, much more disciplined in his approach to business is very high. That, in my opinion. But that's what the story tells you. The story of somebody, the story of you. So now that I've shared that with you, John, let me ask you another question. So I'm starting to share with you right now in the middle of the podcast when I jumped this topic in on you today, didn't I?
You did, which is
okay.
How we normally do it, isn't it?
Right. That's true. It's not right. But now that I'm talking to you about the difference between storytelling and a traditional bio, do you think you might reconsider writing some of your own bios on your website or someplace that you have them? You know what? Who cares where it is? Just someplace.
I really think, yes, that strange enough, we're revamping on the my other business, and I'm thinking about it. I'll probably do the same on the Mailrite About Us page. It has changed a little bit because I added my partner that helps me with Mailrite, Adam Brown. Well, I have to get Adam on the show and interview him so he can tell how awful it is to work with me. Poor old Adam. No, you've explained this really very well, actually, and I'm in the midst of improving the layout. I've got my graphic designer that you recommended to me that still works for us on WP Tonic. He's a great guy, Andrew. He's just done a mock-up, but I will be, based on what you've just said, I will be revamping the actual written. And I think I'll probably add a video on both About Us pages as well. But that'd be interesting to see what your views about utilising video on your About Us page, what you think of that as well. But it's definitely been an eye-opener, what you've just said.
Well, for those of you who are listening, and Jonathan as well, listen, I'm not actually trying to promote myself. Like, this is not go look at me, but I did, like, even though it's extraordinarily long and I'm not necessarily happy with the length, I did, I got in 2017, I had to do about 4 takes. And what I was trying to do when I was doing my about video. So if you're going to ask me, what do I think? Do I think it's effective? I know it's effective. I'm not kidding with you, John, when I say that my about video drives 30% of my business. That is a very big number for a single video that I did back in 2017. And so what did I do on that video that drives so much business? I somehow managed to capture, I used a little bit of psychology, which maybe everybody here listening hasn't studied as much business and psychology books and sales books as I have. So maybe that's a little next level, but I didn't use much. Most of what I did is I decided that I just wanted everybody to understand a couple of really important things that I really didn't want to start like an agency. It really wasn't top of mind. So, and I really meant it. I told all the people I was contracting with in LA that I was never going to start an agency. So I felt that there was a compelling story, and why did I change my mind? And as a matter of fact, the video on my homepage is literally titled why I started like Inbound REM when I was going to quit or something. Why I started Inbound. Oh yeah. Why I started Inbound REM despite wanting to get out of the real estate marketing, because that was true. One thing that I feel is important if you are going to do an about video, I feel like people can sense honesty and integrity. That's just my personal opinion. Take it or leave it. But I strongly feel like people can sense when you're being genuine. And so don't make up a story to tell a story. Tell your real story. But I thought the compelling part of my story was why, when I had already thought many times about retiring out of real estate marketing, why did I decide to basically recommit, dive in, and build my first serious business in like the last 7 or 8 years in the real estate marketing field? And the video tells the story of how I arrived at that decision, which was very analytical. I looked around, I saw the competition. There was really nobody doing something, and I thought it was desperately needed. As a matter of fact, this conversation plays into what I think is desperately needed for real estate, which is we need.
Robert, before we go down that path, it's time for our break, Robert, and then you can then go into what you were just about to say.
Lovely. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, stay tuned in your cars, on your cell phones, on your headsets. We will be right back. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Mail-Right Show. Jonathan is humoring me today. We're having a conversation about using storytelling inside of your marketing.
Well, I think it's been fantastic. You put some ideas in my mind, and I've actually learned something really important. So I think it's been excellent, Robert.
Beautiful. I'm so happy to hear it. So we started off talking about real estate bios and using stories, and we're in the middle of talking about, I'm just going to say, go to inboundrem.com and look at my homepage video. And again, I want to be clear with everybody listening to this show. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not saying go look at it and call me. Nothing. I'm saying look at it from the sense of, is there a story being told? And if so, do you connect into the story? Because a good story is personal. It explains the who, what, why, when of whatever your situation is. So the who is a guy that's been doing real estate marketing for 14 years. The what was, you got to compel, you have to have a compelling element of your story. I think I'm going to circle back around to John, because I don't like using myself as an example as much as I have been. But like with John, one of the questions that I think I legitimately asked you at some point was how did you end up here, and what in the world made you start a couple of digital businesses? I did ask that at some point, didn't I?
Well, in this, yeah, I'm
not
sure.
Today, but like
oh yeah, previously, yes, you have, yes.
Okay, so because I was curious to know what the story of you was. Like, I really did want to understand what motivated you to be, because it's pretty intense to have even one digital company, something that we've talked about privately many times, like how consuming it can be to just do a single company, but you decided to start 2. So
well, I did plan that. It was a kind of a long-winded path that led to that. It wasn't planned to end up in that way.
Right. But here's the thing. All of this stuff that we're talking about today, I'll guess that our dedicated audience is probably starting to get much more interested, and they might be curious to know why they feel so compelled. And here's what's compelling. We as a species is actually very designed to learn through storytelling. That we're literally wired that way. Every single great idea that's been spread throughout all of history, regardless of language, it is always spread with one compelling start point. That is a story. And stories contain interesting facts about somebody. What is your true motivation? And you got to be fearless when you're telling a story. And what do I mean by fearless? John is openly admitted that he has dyslexia. I've openly admitted I'm in recovery. People want to know the nitty-gritty details of whatever the story is that they're reading. And the first place that people go to on your website or on your LinkedIn profile or on your Facebook profile, strangely enough, if they really are interested in learning about you, is still the About page. Mm-hmm. The problem is that most people haven't put anything there at all that's compelling. So to answer your question, John, in terms of do I think that video would work, or would I use video on an about page? The answer is unequivocally yes. What I would suggest for everybody listening to the show today is that, just as an exercise until we have something else to point you to, just go to the Inbound REM thing and look at my video. But here's what I want you to pay attention to. Don't pay attention to my company. Don't pay attention to my offer. Don't pay attention to what I do. Pay attention to, is there a story? Are you compelled to hear the story? Because if the answer to those things is yes, if you're compelled to simply listen to what the story of this other human is, then the job of storytelling has been achieved inside the video. And that's what I'm trying to communicate to all of you today. The strange thing about stories, if I get you to connect to John, if I get you to connect to me, if I get you to relate to our story, there is probably an 80 to 90% more likelihood that you will be compelled to do business with us. And that's the weird part about storytelling. It's not so much trying to raise your hand and sell MailRight as an example, as a service. I'll bet you money that if you knew John as well as I knew him, you'd automatically want to do business with him, because he's a good guy. He's a dedicated human. But I can say those things to you, but they're just not going to resonate. And the reason they're not going to resonate is that you don't know the story of this person for yourself. You don't know his long history and his journey from start to finish. And you have to share that so that the people that want to connect with you are given that opportunity. I'm certain that I've blown quite a few people out of the water. They might get nervous as saying, oh, I don't want to do business with somebody who's a recovering, alcoholic. Like, that would make sense. But for every person that I blow out the door, there are 5 others who either know somebody or they themselves are in recovery and already know the language of that world. And now they feel more connected to me as opposed to less connected to me. Does that all make sense to you, John?
It's totally, absolutely, Robert.
So I'm going to move on from the concept of bios in storytelling and video in storytelling. I'm going to wrap that all up, John, by saying I feel like the concept, the core of inbound marketing and everything that I do is actually based around storytelling. And I really deeply feel that way. It's always just our job to try, like, my whole job is to try to get my clients to become better storytellers, which is obviously very hard for a lot of people. And how do you get comfortable telling a story in front of a camera? How do you get comfortable telling a story? How do you get comfortable sharing details about your life that you might think are intimate? Like, you might say, let's say you're not John and I, but you're a realtor and you have a family of 3 and you're doing business in Tennessee, just as an example. But let's say that one of your children has a learning disability, as an example. Maybe you've had to make a lot of alterations in your life. Maybe you have to work twice as hard in half the hours because you have a special needs child at home. My advice to you as a realtor would be to share that information as part of your story, especially if this incredibly important element is dictating the way that you spend your time. It is very much part of your story. Would you agree with that, John?
Totally, but I can also see why a lot of people are fearful and resistant to some extent to go down this path.
Why? Why do you say that?
Well, they feel a bit, do I want to share something that personal to people? And people online, I get feedback about this show and a lot of feedback on my other show. I'm very much out there, and as you know, especially on social media, people can be very cruel, can't they?
Very much so. Have you had people be cruel to you?
Oh God, especially on my other show. My God, read some of the comments on iTunes on my other show. Like, Interesting shows. Shame that the commentator talks too much.
Wow. Really? That's terrible.
Terrible, isn't it? Shocking. True though, but shocking. No, sorry.
I mean, that's really too bad. I mean, I do know that, John. Obviously, I know that, and I obviously have, I've seen it, and I haven't had to deal with that much of it. I have had people like take apart these reviews I spend hours on, though. Like I've had people on YouTube and things like that just say you did a bad job, or why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that, and it's like it, or I feel like you're like, here's something that happened to me a lot. My Bold Leads review kind of got out of date, and Bold Leads isn't doing as well as it once did. And I've had people leave me flaming comments on my blog about how they feel like I'm promoting a fraudulent company, because I happened to give them a good review, but they had a bad experience. Now that's happened to me quite a few times. So, and it's extraordinary to the levels that people will express their frustration. So I've had that, but not as much on the we're just doing a thing. I'm sorry. That's terrible. How are we doing on time? How much time do we have?
It's time for us to wrap up the podcast part of the show, but if you're up for doing it, but we're getting close to 1. I don't know if you've got any spare time to do any bonus, or we need to wrap it up. We had some technical problems getting this podcast going, but we kind of fought through them. And if you're watching this, don't worry, Robert's not in witness protection. We just couldn't get his camera to work. But on the other hand, I think I've really enjoyed this show, Robert. I think it's been one of our best internal conversations for a while.
What you have no idea how happy that makes me to hear. It's funny because actually, you know what? We will do some bonus content if it's okay with you. Maybe keep it down to 5 minutes, but I would like to share, if you'll allow me to, John, is it's kind of strange how I came into wanting to talk to this, and the reaction to this subject has been somewhat incredible, and I'd kind of like to share that with the audience.
Yeah,
if
sure.
You don't mind. Okay.
So wrap up the podcast, and folks, join us on the bonus content, which you can either watch on the MailRight website or on the MailRight YouTube channel. And I also think Robert shares it on his own website as well.
I do. So I'm gonna, if you don't mind, John, I'm gonna change the format slightly. Feel free to jump in if I miss anything. But for those of you who are listening to the show, my co-host John has his own lead generation system. And so all of you know that I review systems. Many of you who follow, maybe 30% of the audience that follows this podcast has found it through me, follows it because you know who I am already. And so I'm going to say to that 30% that already understands the kind of reviews that I do, that John has a really good lead generation system to look at that is leveraging Facebook, that is connected to a WordPress website and some of the same tools that I use. He's not doing custom work, but he's doing a solid adaptation of the same strategies that I use, a real estate website that you own, using IDX Broker. He's just using Facebook to generate his leads. He has a partner who is, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but he's a world-class Facebook marketer. And so John has gotten partnered with him to help him with leveraging Facebook to the fullness of his ability. He's still somewhat in beta testing, but I've looked at what he's built. It's compelling. And I think that those of you who are in the early stages of your career, maybe year 1 through 3, who are looking for a foot into a new marketing system that isn't just over leveraged by all of your competitors, you should call John. You should go to his website, which is mail-right.com. You should go to the book a demo button. You should click on it. And then you should, there's a calendar there. And then you should look for a time and spend a little bit of time with John. And just so everybody knows, I've actually listened to him do his consultations. So I'm not telling you to go do a thing that I don't understand what you're going to be hearing and listening to. I've sent John a few customers. So I'm pretty enthusiastic about the possibilities of his services. Is there anything you'd like to add to any of that?
It's just that, if you do have a consultation, don't worry. If you decide at the end you don't want to be utilize MailRight, what I try and do in the conversation is provide some tips and insights that will help you anyway, even if you decide that MailRight isn't the right platform for you. So I still try and make sure through the consultation and through the demo that you do get some value from it, don't I, Robert?
You do, and you do provide a lot of value, especially in the subject matter in which you're actually far more seasoned than I am, which is like basically WordPress development. So there's a lot of questions if they had questions about WordPress, that they could probably get that extra value out of a consultation with John. And if you'd like to learn more about me, if this is your first introduction to me and you really don't know who I am, you can just go to my site, inboundrem.com. I am unique, and that's why I don't spend too much time pushing like who I am. I'm really the only inbound marketer operating inside the residential real estate space. So just go to inboundrem.com and find out more about me and the services that we offer. And with that, folks, for those of you who are interested, I'd love for you to join us on YouTube, even though you can't see me, which might be a blessing for some of you. And we'll see you in just a few minutes here. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the MailRight Show. We're on episode number 286. John has really let me go to town today on a topic that is so very near and dear to my heart, which is basically using the art of storytelling to market yourself. And honestly, this topic is good for anybody in any business. It doesn't have to be real estate. But in the first part of the show, we use the example of using storytelling inside real estate bios. And here's an interesting thing that's happened. John, as we were closing down the show, said to me, Robert, I think this is one of the best internal shows that we've done in a long time. And I asked him if I could share just a little bit of information. So here's a fascinating thing, John. The way that this show came up is I had somebody reach out to me through LinkedIn. They messaged me, and it was actually a CEO of a very, very, very large residential real estate brokerage, like one of the biggest. And what they said was, it was very hard for me to figure out exactly what you're doing currently through your LinkedIn bio, which was kind of like a real fist upside the head for me, because I'm supposed to be this, I'm literally advertising myself as being a marketer and a good one at that. And here I've got a major client reaching out to me and telling me he doesn't understand exactly what I do. So I went ahead and I made a commitment in that moment to re-engineer my LinkedIn profile. And instead of going the direction that I was going to go, because my profile was originally the same kind of profile that we've been talking about this whole time. Like I've been in business for this, I did that. I worked for X big media company. I've worked for AT&T and MC. It was basically a list of accomplishments, which apparently really didn't communicate very well to this person. So what I did was I changed it. And when I changed it, I opened it up with, I'm a high school dropout. I changed it. I put the story of me in a very upfront, forthright way onto my LinkedIn profile. And then I also did a support video that kind of shows why most real estate bios suck. Because when I started looking at client bios, I immediately noticed that they all are forgettable. Now, here's the funny thing. In the very brief amount of time since I've re-engineered my LinkedIn profile and since I did this video, the video that I did on storytelling, the 24-minute video, is getting me more subscribers than almost any other video that I've launched recently. And I would have thought that it would be one of my worst. And then I've already had 2 or 3 actual reach outs from real live perspective. I don't know if clients is the right way to put it, but I'd say that people who could legitimately be prospects have opened up dialogues with me on LinkedIn, which had not happened in years. So I guess that just goes, that's why I'm so hot on the topic, John. That's why I want to talk about it today. That's what
Well,
inspired it.
but it's really important, this conversation, and one of our hopefully it's a guest that they've agreed to come on the show in the next few weeks, and she wrote. I've forgotten the lady's name, unfortunately, but she has written a book about branding and about how you build a local brand, and fundamentally it's around story. It's I'll be interested to see if she agrees with that, but this is my take on it. A lot of people, when I say to somebody, you got to build a local brand, that is what you as an agent that wants to be successful in this industry, this is what you are really doing. It is building a brand around yourself. That is why, I work with you on this show. You've been very generous in sending me some possible clients that don't fit precisely into what you got to offer, and I would do the same my side. So I'm quite happy to work with people, and it's the same relationship between an agent and a brokerage, really, is that it's a business association, but the brokerage won't do this for you. You're in the business of building a local brand. Would you agree with that, Robert?
I would totally agree with that. I would agree with that in a very significant way. I would just probably add one little teeny tiny thing to it. I would just say that if in the world that we are in today, John, and I would love to see if you agree with this or not, I strongly believe that, like, if you're going to do something digitally, I think that in the same conversation where you decide to say, okay, I'm going to do something digitally, you have to have the conversation that says, I should get comfortable telling the story of me online. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think that that's one of the most effective ways for you to sell your real estate business, ladies and gentlemen, is you constantly, how many conversations have you had with realtors where they're like, how do I compete against Zillow, or how do I compete against Trulia, or how do I do this, or how do I do that? And I've always thought to myself, well, that's the easiest answer in the world, because Zillow and Trulia and all these other companies, Realtor.com, they're big faceless behemoths. And yes, they've got cool websites, but what they don't have is you, whatever you bring to the table, like whatever that is. They don't have Jonathan, like these other big marketing companies like Ylopo.
Well, it's funny you brought up Zillow, because until you brought up that we're going to talk about story, I was going to talk, because I recently watched a video on YouTube, and the presenter was having, really spelling out in a very effective way what Zillow is trying to do. And don't be fearful if you're an individual agent and you're prepared to build a brand, because I think you'll be okay. Because who is really Zillow gunning for? Well, actually, what they're gunning for is the national brokerage chains and the medium to large regional brokerages. That's what they're really targeting. That's who they think that they're going to be able to drive out of business. What do you think of that, Robert?
I think that is completely true. I mean, as a large corporation, it makes sense that what they're really aiming at is larger companies. But I think that the ancillary damage to this battle of behemoths is always going to be the small broker or the little independent offices. Because most of my business, John, like most of my really good business, is super small local brands that are trying to And when I say super small, please, everybody that listens to the show, understand that I'm competing against teams and brokerages that have anywhere from 1,000 to 180,000 agents. So small to me is like if I get a team that is 10 or 50 people big, that's still pretty small in the grand scheme of the real estate business. So when you're talking about a little brand that wants to dominate its local market and insulate itself against Zillow and Trulia, that's basically who my best client is, John. But that client is getting caught in the crossfire of this digital war that's happening. Do I think that you're right? I do. Do I think that Zillow is targeting them? No, I don't. I think they're targeting EXP, Keller Williams, RE Max, Century 21, Better Homes and Garden. That's who I think they're targeting. And Redfin in particular, like with Zillow, I think that Redfin and Zillow are heating up for a big war between the two of them in this model of, agent, like templated agents working for huge like massive corporations. And that's great. So everybody here that's listening to the show, I do believe that your business is going to be impacted. Fortunately for those people that start following John and I, if you really pay attention to what we're saying and you start to go through the heavy lifting of redesigning your business, I think that people that are doing story-based brand building, really coming up with a compelling, not only story, but like maybe you're even gone so far as to focus on a vertical or become true experts in your market, then display that digitally. These big guys are not going to be able to touch you if you're doing those things. And the more that sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, because as you were saying that in Northern Nevada, I'm going to use Northern Nevada because I don't think it's unusual. It has some unusual elements because it's got Lake Tahoe, Truckee, but most areas have their individual elements to them. But in Northern Nevada, we're dominated by 2 to 3 large regional brokerages. We've got the nationals as well, but we are kind of dominated by 3 local dominant that have between 400 and 800 agents, right? In that mix, that domination of 3 major regional brokerages, there might be over a dozen agents that what I call have built a personal brand. They're known in those 12 agents, I would say half of them, all of them are very effective. All of them have a kind of small power team of people, seller, buyer, junior agents that work with them, but they're still part of a brokerage because that is the legal requirement. But of those 12, that dozen, I would say they're all very effective, but half of them, if I was selling my home, I wouldn't use them because their brand doesn't appeal to me. It just doesn't. But there's about 2 to 3. The way they come across, and I know all of them personally, and there's about 3 or 4 of them that I would hire because they're all effective in the mechanics, but I'm gonna be working with that individual quite closely, and I can't work with somebody quite closely that's going to irritate me from day one.
Right. And that is a lot. So that's a brilliant point. Thank you for bringing it up, John, because I think the point that John and I am both trying to make is that one of the ways to establish brand, like you can be a great real estate agent, you can do radio and you could have a truck and you can decide that you want to market yourself with large displays of luxury because you're already fortunate enough to make a lot of money. I personally wouldn't work with you if you did all that, just because the displays would irritate me. But that doesn't mean you're a bad real estate agent or that your type of marketing doesn't work. Exactly the opposite. It just means that maybe my personality wouldn't click with you. Well, like what I like is I like lots of social proof. It's what I do for my business. Like somebody who's boots on the ground, just doing the hard work, and people are willing to talk about that hard work over and over and over and over again. So that's the kind of person I'm going to seek, not because the other kind of person is bad. but because I'm going to get along with one of those two people, just like what John said. Like I feel like I'd be more inclined to get along with that person. And I totally couldn't agree with you more. If I'm going to do a transaction, one, if I'm going to reward my business, which here in California is going to be a $30,000 to $60,000 commission probably to somebody at a minimum. If I'm going to do that, and then plus you're right, I've got to work with that person. I got to take calls probably late at night. They can't irritate me, right? Like I've already worked an 8 or 10 hour day. Now I've got to talk to a salesperson of some kind. Like I better respect them and like them, right? That's gotta be part of the equation. And so getting your voice out there, your digital voice, like we're talking about, gives people a chance to identify who you are and whether or not they're going to get along with you. And that is super important, because if they decide they will get along with you, pretty much nothing will hold them back.
And it's beneficial. And it's beneficial for you and for them. It's beneficial. You learn in a way, if the more they can make a judgment call, the better it is for you and for them, because there's nothing worse than working for the wrong client. And it's nothing worse for the client working with the wrong agent.
Correct. Absolutely. All right. So I think that we covered a lot of amazing ground. Again, I want to give a shout out to my co-host who's been kind enough to let me just like go on and on. And I'm so glad that you enjoyed the topic, John, and that you felt it was relevant. Thank you everybody for tuning in. John and I are so eternally grateful. If you want to leave some comments in the YouTube channel or the Apple channel, the place that we have this, the iTunes, like we work really hard on the show, especially John. And so if you think that we've done something that you find valuable, please do us the favor of saying so or giving us a thumbs up someplace.
That's great.